Well, it's important to sort of put yourself on the line. Not that you have to say, this is a fact and I'm going to get behind it and I don't care what you say. No. It's rather more... I think this is one of the things I like about nonfiction is that you can step onto a turf which is the turf of ambivalence.
I was young when I read that book. I can't remember how old I was. And I found it very, very formative in so many ways.
What do you mean?
Well, it made me check my behaviour.
Oh, really? Oh.
It did, as a young woman.
Yeah. And what was the thing that made you the most angry?
That you left that apartment every day to allow him time to write. That made me furious. That was the thing I should have
been angry with 5 years earlier, or maybe even 10 or 12. I don't believe it either.
Hi everyone, Cheryl Akle. This is Authors on Authors, and as you know, I'm not an author, but I am today sitting in the chair with Helen Garner. Yes, Helen Garner. This is a Authors on Authors special, and we thought that Helen was special enough just to have a one-on-one. Welcome, Helen, to Authors on Authors.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
It's such a privilege. Do you know, I feel that your writing has crossed so many readers. Like I've always had a theory, and I'll be interested to know what you think of this. There is a group of readers that always read. They're familiar with fiction, they love reading and non-fiction. They know how to find books, they know how to get their next read, and they are really what we call avid readers. Then I think there's another circle where sometimes not the reluctant reader, but a reader who's not reading all the time, who's not in that first group, a story might touch them through a recommendation or a review they've read, and that then spreads that book out to that second circle, if you like. And I think what happened with you, it was Jo Cinque's Consolation.
Oh, really?
I do think that, yeah. Because I don't know if you remember, that was on the bestseller list for quite a long time.
Yeah.
It sold in bookstores, it sold in chains, but it also sold in places like Big W and Kmart. Mm-hmm. So it really, I mean, that was a phenomenal bestseller, wasn't it?
I don't look at the figures. I can't stand looking at them.
No, fair enough. But I think that what it did...
I think you're right, because strange experiences happen after Jo Cinque had been out for quite a while. People, for example, I bought a futon and a futon base, and the guy came to deliver it to my house, and he says to me, are you the person who wrote that book, Jo Cinque's Consolation? I go, yeah, that was me. And he says, look, I'd like you to do something for me. I'm going to give you this money, and I want you to buy a pot plant and give it to Maria Cinque, Jo's mum. And I said, that's Helen. Wonderful. All right, yeah, I'd be happy to do that. So I did that. And the other strange experience, well, it's not strange, it's kind of really gratifying, is I was actually having a mammogram, and the technician was a bloke. He was a Greek guy. And, he sort of did the examination, and he says to me, did you write that book, Jo Cinque's Consolation? I go, yeah. And he goes, oh, yeah, I love that book. He said, listen, I'm not supposed to tell you the results of these tests, but I'll tell you now, there's nothing wrong with you.
So that's the favour you get for writing great stories.
Yeah.
But I do think that that's why the Helen Garner, you broke the genre, if you like, and more people are reading it, and I think that's fantastic. And I think the season is going to be the same. But let me firstly... I like to formally introduce people, for those very few people out there that might not know who you are. Helen writes novels, stories, screenplays and works of non-fiction. In 2006, she received the inaugural Melbourne Prize for Literature, and in 2016, she won the prestigious Wyndham Campbell Prize for Non-Fiction. She was honoured with the Australia Council Award for a Lifetime Achievement in Literature in 2019, and in 2023, she was awarded the ASA Medal for her outstanding contribution to Australian literature. Her works include Monkey Grip, The Children's Bark, First Stone, Jo Cinque's Consolation, The Spare Room, The House of Grief, and 3 volumes of her diaries. Is it 4 volumes now?
3.
3 volumes of her diaries. She lives in Melbourne. There's so much I want to talk about, but one of the things that I want to talk about is very few authors can write fiction and non-fiction with the same interchangeability, if you like, with the same, the audience or the reader receives whatever it is that you write for them. Usually, as you know, you're either a fiction writer or a non-fiction writer.
Mm. Yeah, well, actually we were talking last night about this whole question of writing non-fiction, and I started out thinking, like a lot of people do, that the novel is the thing you've got to aim for, that it's this sort of preeminent literary form in prose. And, I went through university and we didn't read any non-fiction there. And I thought, okay, well, I don't actually know how to write a novel. I haven't got a clue. And the only thing I can do that I'm any good at is writing. But, I've never had anything published or anything. So I feel in my fiction I look back on it now and I see there's a certain sense of strain. I mean, you can feel that I'm trying hard. And whereas I don't feel that when I'm writing non-fiction, I feel I feel a lot more free and relaxed in non-fiction, and I was really pleased that I discovered that. Well, when I say discovered it, I've written a hell of a lot of freelance journalism over the years, and that's how I made a living between books. But I feel that non-fiction's really my natural form. That's sort of where I should be. But the trouble is nobody really knows what non-fiction is. It's a negative term. It's basically saying this is not a novel. But, I don't know sort of where to put myself.
That's really interesting. It is that, isn't it? It's not a novel.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it's saying.
I think it's saying a lot of other things as well. I think it's saying this is true. Everything in this book is true if it's non-fiction. And, of course...
That's not true.
That can be true or not true, yeah.
Because it relies on memory so much. Which book was your first non-fiction?
Let me think. Well, was it for the First Stone even? Was it?
That's a good segue because I want to talk about First Stone. I was young when I read that book. I can't remember how old I was, and I found it very, very formative in so many ways.
What do you mean?
Well, it made me check my behaviour.
Oh, really? Oh,
it did. As a young woman,
yeah.
It made me see the world in a different way. Like, I always thought that people that were more important than me or had a higher status than me, mainly men, right, were really the dominant characters in the room, and I would always give in to that, I mean, and also, I was married for a short while, and I was married to a painter, and he was always the dominant person in the room because people love the craft, they love the art and they wanted to talk about it, and I'm not an artist. But the First Stone gave me permission, I think, to kind of recalibrate myself in a room. Gee,
that's the best thing anyone's ever said to me about it. I'm really happy about that. I just got used to being slagged off about that book. It was really awful.
Because your view was contentious?
Well, yeah, because it was... Well, somebody said to me recently that it was a sort of battleground between second wave feminism and whatever it is that's come after. And it was, I can see that now.
I think it's almost a precursor to Me Too.
Yeah, but... but, oh, gosh, if I published that book now, I'd be dead meat.
Yeah, you'd be in trouble, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I hope I'd have the guts to fight back.
But you know what I always think too? That people don't... they don't give credit to people having a voice, the victim having a voice, or the the perpetrator having a voice. Everybody has a voice and an opinion, and it is their experience. And I think you were quite blunt with that.
Well, I hope so. I felt that it was, to put it crudely, the whole thing was like a sort of clusterfuck. And it was terrible for everybody. Everybody behaved in stupid ways or wrong ways or foolish ways. And And it, I think what the Master of the College was accused of having done kind of opened the door to some very tough feminists who were in the college, and they thought, "Whoa, here's a go," and they took it on, and then a great deal of suffering ensued.
It's interesting, I guess non-fiction is that. You're kind of putting yourself on the line versus fiction where you can maybe a little bit hide behind it.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah. Well, it's important to sort of put yourself on the line. Not that you have to say, this is a fact and I'm going to get behind it and I don't care what you say. No. It's rather more... I think this is one of the things I like about non-fiction is that you can step onto a turf which is the turf of ambivalence. You can say, I'm not sure. And that's why I always build myself into the books as those court books anyway, as an observer, because it means you can report something and you can say, well, I was convinced by that, but I'm still worried about that, or I really don't. The ideal is, for me, is to get the reader to come with me into the story and see how complex it is and how it's not a simple matter of black and white.
Ever.
Yeah.
Ever, is it?
No. And just the amount of anguish there is in people's lives. And
that gets me on to Jo Cinque. I mean, it's... For those people that haven't read it, and please do, it's you sat through a case. Or how did you meet Maria? How did you meet Jo's mother?
Oh, well, I just... Actually, an older journalist rang me up. I was living in Sydney at the time, and said, look, there's this amazing story that's happening down in Canberra. It's your kind of thing. I thought, what, really? And so, but I went down there and I walked in and I had been in courts before, but it was the first time I sat down and I thought, okay, yeah, I belong here. I can do this. And Maria Cinque and her husband, Nino, were sitting in the front row at the court and radiating angst. But at a certain point...
The injustice.
But at a certain point, I went to the toilet at a break in the proceedings and she was in there too. And we were both at the mirror, putting on our lipstick. And I've always thought this was rather significant, that the first time we looked at each other was in a mirror. So I don't know what this is significant of, but I remember it being a strange feeling. She looked up and saw my reflection and she said, are you a journalist? And I said, sort of. And she, smiled at me and I thought, well, here's my chance. And so I said, if I write something about this, would you speak to me? And she looked me up and down. She turned away from the mirror and looked right at me. And she said, yes. And I thought, that was one of the moments of my life where I can feel a door opened to me. Maria said yes. I look back on that and I see that as a crucial moment because I don't know if I would have gone ahead otherwise. It was just too painful and terrible, the story. And so, and we're still friends. When I go up to Newcastle, I go and spend a day with her and she's really good company. She's really funny.
Do you know, when I have the precise memory of when I read that book, where I was sitting. I was living in an apartment in Surrey Hills. I picked it up on a Saturday morning and I did not, it became dark and I was still sitting there reading the book. And it makes me emotional thinking about it now. But I remember at the time thinking about Gabriel Garcia Marquez, his book Chronicle of a Death Foretold, and where you think there were so many points where you could have stopped this. And as a mother, Maria, the mother, not being able to have stopped it at any point, or any other character in the book, made it seem like, in a way, a horror story.
Yeah. Yes, well, you see, I lost my nerve. I'm about halfway through. I've actually built this into the book, but I thought, I can't do this. It's too much. I thought I couldn't see where to sort of put myself. vis-a-vis the story, or how I was going to write it when the time. And by this time, I'd already gone to the Cinque's place and spent like 9 hours at their kitchen table, and I'd taped it all, and I had all this amazing kind of first-person material, and I just went home and I thought, but this is going to be too one-sided. How am I going to get the other side into this? And I basically freaked out, and I wrote them a letter and I said, look, I'm terribly sorry, but I'm going to have to abandon this. I'm just not a good enough writer to do it. I don't know how to do it. And she rang me up. She said, what do you mean? You're not going to write. We give you our story, you say you're right. You're right. And, she really put a bomb under me. And so I was ashamed. I was ashamed as if I'd, gone up to her and got her trust and then thought, oh, this is too hard, and walk away. That would be, that letter I wrote them, I'm very ashamed of it now. But she just sees the nettle. You don't muck around with somebody like Maria. She's probably the strongest person I've ever met in my life.
She really, really was an amazing character in that story. Do you know something else too? I didn't know, because it might have been an early copy or something I was reading. I can't remember because I've been in the industry so long. I'm often sent books, but I didn't know very much about it until I started reading it. And I guess now people do know about it, but I didn't know that there was a photo of Jo at the end of the book until I got to the end of the book.
Nobody knew. No. I didn't even think I'd ever do it. It didn't occur to me to put in a photo.
That really was, for me, just emotionally shattering. Yeah. Like, I felt that I knew him in reading the book. I felt that there were so many points it could have been stopped, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, but then when I got to the end and there was that photo, which usually would be at the beginning, it floored me.
Yeah, I can't remember whose idea it was to put it at the end, but I'm glad I did that because a lot of people have said a version of what you just said. I mean,
it's so powerful to the story.
And it's such a,
Yeah. Okay, I'm skipping quite a few years now, and I want to start talking about the diaries and the latest diary, which I read when I was nursing my mother in her last week of life. In a nursing home. I read the diaries, and I read Chloe Hooper's bedtime story.
That's a beautiful book.
Isn't that a beautiful book? And because I was in the room, mostly it was during COVID, and I was in the room on my own, I'd often read out loud. I quite liked that, and I wondered whether she could hear me. But I got angry at you a few times.
I bet you did. That does not surprise me.
How was it to tell me you were telling me such personal things about yourself, and sometimes I didn't like your responses or your reactions, and I was viscerally angry with you, And
what was the thing that made you the most angry?
That you left that apartment every day to allow him time to write. That made me furious. That was the thing I should have
been angry with 5 years earlier, or maybe even 10 or 12. I don't believe it either. I think what a wimp I had become.
How does that happen to us?
Well, let me tell you something. When that book came out, I couldn't really count the number of women who said to me, almost all of them in exactly the same words, this could be my marriage. And they're women who are still in the marriage. And I don't know, women will cop a hell of a lot of bad treatment. And I think, well, I can tell you one thing about me is that this was my third marriage. And I felt like the other two had ended painfully and disastrously. And I thought, well, it must be something I'm doing wrong. And that's a typical woman's move, isn't it, to say, well, it must be me. I'm inadequate to it in some way. I'll try harder. I'll try harder to be generous, and I'll
try harder to shut up.
Yeah. And so, what happened, and one day I just thought, boom, I thought, this is over. I'm out of here. But it was a long time. One says should. I should have done this and I should have done that, but for reasons that we don't really understand, we just hang on and endure things that are unendurable and that it's shameful afterwards to think that you've put up with.
I think it's about learning, isn't it? I don't know. I don't carry a lot of shame. I don't.
Oh, God, I do. Full of
do
it.
you?
Yeah, and guilt.
Yeah, I don't do either.
Oh, good on you. How'd you get out of it? Or maybe you never did.
I don't know. Maybe I never did. I mean, I suffer and I have angst and I have so many things. I mean, I've had a really bad couple of years. But, I don't know. I kind of think that because I don't like the culture of blame, I don't want to blame you and I don't want to blame myself. And I think we're all just learning, When people talk to me about, people being, really bad parents, and I think, well, that's, parenting, that's all you know. That's all you get, And so I feel that, guilt is about blame, and I try not to do that to myself and to others. That's all. I was angry with you, but I wasn't blaming you for anything.
Well, I know what you mean, and I know that as you get older, as I've got older, I feel much more general kind of empathy for everybody, murderers, everybody. In situations where you see people who are suffering, and I think everybody's suffering. And I think, what the Buddhists say, life is suffering. And it is. It's a lot of other things as well. But we're all sort of, and in Christian terms, we're all fellow sinners. We all miss the mark. We don't make it to what we think is the decent thing to do.
Are you religious?
Well, yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, I would call myself a Christian.
Would you? Yeah. I'd call... my mother was so forward-thinking. At 16, she was a very religious person. She went to Mass every day until she couldn't.
Oh, that's really extreme.
Yeah, but not extreme by nature, not extreme by judging. Anyway, when we were 16, you had the option of continuing with religion or bowing out.
Well, what happened at 16?
She thought it was a coming of age thing, I guess.
Oh, this is just your mother?
Yes.
I thought maybe it was a church thing.
No, just my mother.
Here's the fork in the path.
But she did say to me, and I remember it very clearly, it's your choice now. You either come or you don't come.
Wow, what a mother.
And I walked and I became an atheist, I think, back then. But, which is maybe why I don't have the guilt thing. But either way, I'm guided by those values. There's, you can't walk away from that.
An anarchist an atheist can be... as guilty as hell, because guilt's kind of a moral thing. It's not a religious thing to me. I don't feel that God will punish me for doing things or I'll go to hell or anything like that.
I know.
I don't. Moral things greatly interest me, actually.
Yes,
and
definitely.
the morals. Everybody's in some sort of moral struggle.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I'm definitely a
But
candidate.
I don't know, for some reason, and I wasn't raised as a Christian. My parents weren't interested.
Right.
But I went to an Anglican school, so I was, familiar with the Bible and the prayer book, and I found them very important things in my life.
Yeah. So I want to talk about ageing, because I kind of am, as a reader, really intrigued with what you write at a certain time in life and what you write as you get older. And what struck me, that thought first entered my head when I read Paul Auster and New York stories, hip, groovy, being in New York, young, And as he got older, his stories got darker and sadder, right? And one of his stories, I saw him at the Adelaide Writers' Festival with his wife, I think, Suri Hestevet, but he was talking about being a grandparent. And that was really quite interesting to me, how, that the Paul Auster was now writing from a perspective of being older. I mean, it's quite terrible. I don't know if you know this, but
He had his son.
Yes, and then Anyway, so life for him, I'd imagine, was very tough. But for me as a reader, I started to wonder, in terms of writing fiction and non-fiction, what age brings to the story and how the story changes as you get older.
Well, I think one thing that changes is you. I've read there are two people who've made this remark that I've picked up. Germaine Greer said somewhere, it's a really good thing to to lose your sense of grievance. She said that in passing. I can't remember in which book it was. And the other person is Marilyn Robinson. In one of her books, she's got a character who's an old man, an old preacher. He's an old Calvinist minister, and he just talks about how when you get older, he's talking to his very young son. He says it's a wonderful thing to lose your sense of grievance. That's what you should try to do. And see, I mean, as a feminist and as a woman, you go through life with a completely justifiable sense of grievance, and you're fighting and everything. You have to examine every situation with extreme scepticism to see where the power is in it and how that's going to redound upon you.
And whether it's worth it in that moment.
Yeah, and what sort of struggles are worth taking on, and when you can afford to let something be what it is. That's a very hard thing to learn to do in life. But I found one thing is that after my third marriage ended, in a painful and humiliating way, which is, the diary that you were talking about tells that story. I thought, okay, well, that's that. Love and romance and sex, that's finished for me. I'm going to do something else now. I'm not going back there because it seems to lead only to trouble and sadness in my case.
For a lot of people.
Yeah.
Not just your case.
So, but right, and then a door opened into being a grandmother. And that's when life became sort of simple and more meaningful, and I wasn't fighting to find a place in my domestic situation. Because I lived next door to my daughter and her husband, and they're as they went on 3 kids, I could see what my position was, where I was going to be useful, and I wasn't trying to fight for justice every day. And
do you know what and this is the book we're talking about, The Season, but do you know what I think? I think where you got to, and this is how I felt just by reading the book, is I think there are so many forms of love, and in a certain part of our lives, in our, the way that we're made up from, our 20s or our teens up to, 50, perhaps, we are, all of us, so obsessed with the notion of romantic love, I think, Yeah. But I think in The Season, you are in love, but it's a different kind of love. It's in love with your grandchildren. And that to me, and that's happened to me, I got the privilege of loving my great nephews, and I think that's a really powerful form of love.
Yes, grandparents play a particular role in a family, and I from being part of the family, I mean, I was sort of invited in, and but you've got to figure out where you stand, and that's partly what I'm talking about in The Season, that you have this really deep love for these children, but they're not your children, and you're not where the buck stops. You're not the source of their discipline or however it is that their parents want to raise them. So in a sense, you're there to serve, and the word to serve has been very useful to me. I think, a lot of your life you're thinking, what can I get? Where can I get to? If I do this, where will it get me? And then you get to be old and something else happens. You realise that you can give and give and give, and there's more there to give always. You're not going to run out, and you're not going to turn around and go, I am being ripped off in this situation. You don't get that feeling. And
it is pure unconditional love, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think the children feel that too, and it's an enormously privileged role to play in a family, to be a grandparent, and you do have to learn to back off sometimes. You're not really at the centre of it. You're more on the periphery, but you're very strongly there. But you're the one who's to be called upon. Yeah, I think these have been the happiest years of my life, without a doubt, the last 25 years.
I think we have that in common. My niece, she had a child 16 years ago, so it's very similar to your grandson here. And I said to her, just to help her out, one day I said, I'll pick them up. I'll pick him up from, it was daycare, and it was near me. She lives not far. I'm not next door, but I'm just across the park from her. And I've had to be careful with that too, you know, the physical closeness and giving them their space and her space as a parent and as a family and whatever. But anyway, I said to her, I will pick him up from daycare one day a week on a Monday. And, you know, he finally stopped coming when he was 13 or 14. And then he had a brother. So I did it for both of them. And she often says to me that is a gift that I gave her. You know?
Oh, that's wonderful.
But
it's a wonderful thing.
It's my gift.
And it's a wonderful thing to be trusted in that way. That I just think it's a pity that, you know, but we used to talk about the nuclear family, and we had all these theories about it and what was wrong with it. But when you actually see an extended family that works, you think, oh, yeah, there is another way of doing this.
There is, yeah, absolutely.
I'm always surprised that there are some people who, you know, when you read articles where somebody's interviewing grandparents, and some of them say, oh, I'm not doing that. You know, I've done enough of that, waking up in the middle of the night, and forget it, they can deal with it. And I'm always really shocked. I think, well, what are you going to do with all that love? Where's it going to go?
This is it. It's just, you know, and that's what I say to people. For me, it's just not another form of love.
Yeah.
Really,
huge.
really deep love. I love it. And, you know, we are so lucky to have it. Okay, let's talk about the season, because one of the things that I was surprised with when I picked it up was that it seemed to me that it was about sport. And I know zero about sport and zero about football and zero about everything else. And luckily, it turned out that these two kids that I'm talking about, they didn't play a lot of sport anyway, so I was lucky. And the little one is interested in art, and that's something I am, so we've got that in common. And I thought, I don't know how this is going to work for me. I mean, what's Helen telling me about sport? But it isn't about that. It's a narrative about a relationship. And again, you're in it. It's your story, but it's all of our story, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I hope so, and I'm getting a lot of responses for it in that sort of tone, you know, saying... See, when we had a lot of discussion about the cover, and I had chosen this... I'd liked a certain photo that was a very close-up photo of the backs of some of the boys in the huddle, you know, at three-quarter time before when the coach is talking to them and revving them up for the last quarter. And, you know, you can just see these big muscly shoulders and dirt and sweat and there's a little hallway passing through the doors, through the heads of the boys, and you can see somebody shouting, really yelling, a boy. I thought, oh boy, that's so cool. But the publisher said, no, we can't have that because he said I'm trying to sell this book to two separate lots of people. There are some people who read anything you write, but they don't care about football and don't know anything about it.
That's
to sell it to them. Or the other one is people who are crazy about footy and have never heard of you. So we have to kind of find a path between those, or a way to include both of them. So that little picture that's on the front is, you know, sort of quite... Until you look closely and see some of them are down the bottom, having been squashed and kicked right down to the bottom of the pile. It looks very poetical, you know, it's got that sort of soft sky behind it, and
it's gorgeous.
One of the things in the book you'll remember is that none of the boys in the team ever gave me eye contact for the entire season, but I wasn't pushing my way in and expecting to talk to them. No, but I was standing back just taking notes, and I, on purpose, stayed well back. But I had no... I kind of realised that actually it was giving me a great freedom as a writer, because... you know, like, I mean, I was following the team for a whole season, which is months and months and months.
Yeah. And it was cold.
Yeah, but I'd be there for, you know, 2 nights a week watching training, and I kept back. I didn't greet anybody, and that was good. But they sometimes the coach would be talking to them, and I would
You had some interaction with the coach.
Oh, yeah, but the coach is a guy that I found. I knew him already as a child, but now he was an enormous grown-up. But when I occasionally would say to the coach, can I come in and listen tonight when you were going to tell them off for something that had happened in a brawl? And I stood right up behind the boys with a notebook and a pencil in my hand, and they just completely acted like I wasn't there. And I was right up against them. And I thought, this is the most free I've ever felt as a writer. And a non-fiction writer, when you bang
about
up
your
against
observation.
It. Well, no, just free about that I can get right in here and I can stand right behind you and you don't care and you're not going to object and you don't even know I'm there. So it's sort of like I was like a ghost figure, and they didn't see me as a person that they owed anything to or expected anything from.
Because I would have made every one of them say hello to me every game.
You would not. Give a line up, boys, and greet Auntie Cheryl.
We've got to go soon, but I do want to ask you about this, and I don't know, I must have read something about where you touched on this, about the visibility of getting older and the visibility, I guess, of a writer. And people say that to me a lot, like people my age or people younger, like say women in their 50s, that they're starting to feel more and more invisible.
Yeah.
I don't feel that.
Yeah.
And I wonder, is it because I just push myself into something? Or tell me about your experience of that, because...
Oh, well, you see, I think that there's different sorts of looking, and there's something that's, commonly called the erotic gaze, which is when you're young enough to be, sort of out there in the sexual world, and there's this kind of zing, an erotic zing that passes between people until they get to a certain age. And then past a certain age, it stops happening. Yeah. And at first, I think women often feel the erotic gaze coming from men as a pressure. You have to defend yourself from it to go about your business. But then, I don't know, somehow you pass a point where you're going to be attracting such a gaze. And at first I thought, nobody notices me anymore. I'm not going to be able to talk to strangers anymore. But I did, eventually I'd do what you did. I'd just barge in, and I have a lot of conversations with strangers on trams, and I love that. I find
and I think that's an age thing too.
Yeah.
I talk to people.
Well, nobody's worried about you when you're old. They can just take you as a pleasant, curious person who wants to hear their stories. They don't ask you anything, have you noticed? It's really just the old lady saying, oh, what's that you're carrying? And what school do you go to? That kind of thing. And you're absolutely not threatening. So you've got this, it's one of the privileges of being old.
I can't tell you what a privilege it is for me to have you here at Better Reading, but also on a personal note, I've admired and read every word, and after reading your diaries, I feel as though that, I'm a friend of yours without even
why not? Let's be friends.
Time with you. Yeah, let's be friends. Let's be literary friends. But, your career so far has just been astounding, I think, and it has really affected, and had a profound effect on my life. And I thank you for that.
Thank you, Cheryl. That's a really nice thing. Thank you.